Welcome to episode 35 of the Ask the Law Firm Seller Show. My name is Jeremy Pook, and I lead Senior Attorney Match. In today's episode, we're actually going to change our format a bit. We have welcomed guests to the Ask the Law Firm Seller Show, and typically the guests are part of the second segment. Today's episode is going to differ. We are excited to welcome Dennis Meador. Dennis is the founder of the Legal Podcast Network. We're going to interview Dennis from the beginning, and then we're going to switch it up because Dennis leads multiple podcasts, directs podcasts, and Dennis is also then going to go into the ask phase for himself, and he'll be presenting several questions that Dennis and I will go back and forth on in the topic area of purchases and sales of law firms. So excited today to welcome Dennis Meador. Dennis is the founder of the Legal Podcast Network. As we are recording today's episode, LPN is about to celebrate its second year, having been launched in May of 2024. They already have 200 plus podcasts on the Legal Podcast Network. They are featuring and publishing 400 podcasts a month. So Dennis, congratulations. Welcome to our show, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and LPN, please.
Thank you. Good to be on. A little bit about myself. I am a lifelong entrepreneur. I think my first real sort of entrepreneurial endeavor was about 14 years old. So 34 years of that. I got into marketing in my late teens, 18, 19 years old, and started my first marketing company. I think it was about 22, 23 years old. And that took off, did well. And that's been my career. I have worked in marketing for a long time. I switched purely to digital. And when I switched to digital in 2003, so that I'd have been 26 at the time, I started working with attorneys. And that's when I kind of found my place is digital marketing with attorneys now since 2003. I've had different social agencies, SEO companies, things that I've been a part of. I've helped others grow their company as kind of like a partnership. I've had my own companies that have grown, but I've been in and around this thing really since the beginning, each iteration of the internet thus far. And that I think gives me a unique perspective on maybe what's coming up next.
Great. Thank you so much. So in terms of that, like what's coming up next, what we are regularly talking about is a real shift in the values of law firms. That is pre-Google and really pre-2020. Of course, the world got so pivoted in 2020 digitally. But pre-2020, pre-Google, so many lawyers built the value of their practices with their books of business, with handing out hundreds, thousands of business cards every single year and building up their reputation as a traditional rainmaker. Post 2020, we're now seeing, I'm curious to know your thoughts on this too, Dennis, we're now seeing digital rainmaker attorneys, digital rainmaker law firms, where clients are able to find lawyers online. And clients want to know, like, and trust a lawyer, a law firm before even contacting them. And I really think, and we all experience this, that one of the best mediums to get to know, like, and trust an attorney and to know what their authority is in the area that a given client needs for a given legal need is via podcasting. So could you share with us, Dennis, your thoughts? I mean, 200 plus podcasts on LPN. Why are so many lawyers starting podcasts, leading podcasts? What's the value?
So there's a couple of different value propositions in having a podcast. I think most people, when they think of podcasts, they think very much the format you and I are in. Bring somebody on, ask them questions, and that is it could be it could be a thought leadership play. And I think first and foremost, what attorneys need to ask themselves when they're thinking about whether or not they want a podcast is the why of what they want to accomplish with their podcast. They can cultivate thought leadership. They want to be recognized within their industry. Maybe they've built up their practice. They feel like they've got something to share. They want to give back to a industry that's given so much to them. And so they put themselves, and I have clients that do this, in a position where they're just trying to give back. And I mean, that's great. You end up on stages at different, events and different bar things. You get invited. So thought leadership is something that a lot of attorneys will use a podcast for. However, most attorneys, when they are looking to, at spending money in the marketing realm, they're not doing it as a goodwill to their industry. They're doing it as, how do I grow my practice? How do I get more clients? And how do I get a higher quality of client or case types? And so that falls under the second two types of podcasts. One is a community building podcast, where you're essentially entrenching yourself in the community. And the fact that you're a lawyer is a backdrop. So you're interviewing business owners, you're interviewing maybe local, celebrities or local, things that happen with local people. So you're almost becoming like a news segment or, kind of a overview segment of your community. And so they use their podcast for community building. That is a very slow approach that, that it's akin to the having an ad in the church bulletin, having an ad at the Little League baseball. It's kind of a modern version of that. You don't necessarily expect people to see your billboard at the Little League and then run to your office and hire you. But the third one, and this is one that we've really focused on, and I'm not going to say I came up with this, but I will say that as I thought through, having worked with attorneys now for over 20 years, as I thought through, okay, having a podcast is like a great way to get your name out there and differentiate yourself and be different. But how can I position attorneys to actually see consistently clients come from it? And that's what we do. I'd say 80% of our client base do what we call authority podcasts. And that is very simply a podcast that doesn't cast you as the interviewer, the attorney. It casts you as the person who's being interviewed consistently. And so what we do is we build content plans based around our clients' profiles, our clients' profile, so divorce lawyer, high asset, and then we actually come in and have a host that asks them the questions. So you have to just determine, is this to grow my business? Is this to entrench me in the community? Or is this to entrench me in my legal community?
Terrific. So let's talk about authority. I mean, it's just so fascinating about how, when a client is looking, and let's tag on to what you're talking about, a divorce attorney, right? Somebody is in need of a divorce attorney in their given community, Googling for best attorney near me. Could you share with us like the experience that some of your clients may be telling you, that because they have the authority that they are developing in the podcast, that people are listening and then making the call to the given lawyer or law firm?
Absolutely. So like a podcast it's like a book. Like it can sit on a shelf and never be read. You have to take that podcast and you have to market it. And that's been the biggest growth of what we've seen. So we started out as a podcast production and distribution company, but we've now become an ecosystem, a marketing ecosystem that puts podcasting at the center of it. And so with Authority Podcasting, what we do is our hosts sit down in about 15, 20 minutes, ask about 7 to 10 questions to our attorneys. And typically an episode is, if I'm going through a divorce, how can I make sure that I keep the boat, the lake house, and things like that? And so the attorney will sit down and answer these questions from our professional hosts who've been doing this for years, who can, they're just literally just having a conversation like they would across the desk with a potential client. We then take that and we break it up and we put it on social media and we create site content. And so what we've got to understand is, if you're just trying to show up at the moment of decision, you are a commodity. You have to be present in the buyer's journey along the way, so that when the decision to actually hire somebody comes along, you're already their attorney in their mind. And that's the situation we create is like, okay, so, we're separated. I'm thinking through the process. I'm like, man, I know she's going to go after that lake house because I love it. So I'm like, how do I keep the lake house? And then I see this little like 2-minute clip from one of my, from a local attorney that talks about just that. Click here to watch the rest of the podcast. And I see, the boat and all the, these ancillary assets in our household. And so I'm like, this person seems to really know what they're talking about. And then maybe another podcast catches or another clip catches. And then over time, as questions come, you use the term know, like, trust. Now this becomes my de facto authority because we're in a digital age way before 2020. I mean, think about this. We're 3.5 generations into living digitally. So like Gen Z, Gen Alpha, pure digital. Millennial, digital since they were young teenagers. Gen X, which is what I am, digital since my late teen years, early 20s. So we have lived and trusted and built affinities digitally, most of us half or almost or our entire life. And so what we're doing is we're inserting the attorneys into the way that people already relate to people, which is through digital, answering questions and kind of digging down so that instead of going best attorney near me, when it's time, they make the call. And this is what our attorneys hear. Hey, I've been listening and watching your podcast now for a little while. What is it going to take to work with you? Which for attorneys is a much better question than they typically get on new call-ins, which is, how much is it? Right? Well, what's your retainer? What's your hourly? Why? Because when you're commoditized, the only difference is the price. So you have to uncommoditize yourself and your practice, make yourself a real person that helps real people in situations just like mine. Mm-hmm. That's what connects me to you.
Amazing, Dennis. Thank you. So from a purchase and sales standpoint, how do you think about authority building, and brand building? Right? We're regularly talking now about law firm sales 2.0, right? And law firm sales 1.0, which is where most law firm sales still are today. It's the sale of the book of business generated, so I'll use the word analog, right? It's an analog developed by a traditional rainmaker. Law firm sales 2.0 is really analog plus digital, meaning that we have real digital value. Clients are coming to us because of Google, because of AI, because of our podcasts, multiple channels of digital marketing that our firm is deploying. We can actually track digitally where the client originations are as compared to the traditional book of business based on word of mouth. Next to digital value is brand value. Right, is that we have a brand. We are branded as let's continue focusing on family law for a moment. We are branded towards the mid 40s to late 50s. We have a couple of children. We've developed some wealth, and we need a divorce attorney for that particular segment of the community. What are your thoughts on authority leading to brand?
So I come from a pretty unique background in that I also had a parallel career as a pastor for about 20 years, from 16 to 34, so technically 18 years. And so, a lot of people ask this question because we're moving to personal branding, making yourself the brand, making the attorney the brand, which has kind of been the thing anyway. But when you have authority from an individual that builds a brand over time, in the transition, I think some people are sort of afraid. Well, if I'm not Forest Hills Law Firm, with a logo and a nice slogan that people have an affinity for, which, by the way, people don't trust logos anymore. You like, if you look at branding, you look at marketing, you look at movers in, like, personal branding has become the thing. People want to know. There is an expectation of leadership within companies to be accessible digitally. and not necessarily I can, access you directly, even though, like, think about Elon Musk. Like, yeah, you can think what you think about him, but it's not a dumb idea to be a billionaire and still tweet back to people every once in a while. To take a step from off that place and come down and be like, oh yeah, hey, no, let's talk. Morgan and Morgan's another one right now. What is he doing the last year or two? Morgan and Morgan has been on how many podcasts, how many YouTube shows? Why is that? Because he's probably getting ready to hand the mantle off. So he's entrenching his authority so that he can then become a brand. Because once you become a brand, that then has to be able to be transferable. That brand has to be transferable. So I think the authority is the individual. The brand is the ability to transfer the authority if need be.
Yeah, and it's a great answer. And I also think that from the buyer's standpoint, right? Like, what is it that buyers of law firms want and need, right? They want and need clients, of course. They need talent. They also need the engines to drive new business. And so from a buyer's standpoint, we're seeing buyers today that are very interested in the digital performance and the digital opportunities that we work mostly with senior attorneys, but we're starting to see, and we talk about startup law firms. If somebody's leading a podcast and has X number of followers that continues to increase and the business continues to come from that podcast, like, that is a potential, for lack of a better word, target for buyers. Like, why don't we bring that authority that that person has, bring that authority into our firm, because we want to grow our family law department, and this person's been killing it by building up authority on the podcast that she has, let's say, and this is going to happen more and more. And so we really
Well,
appreciate. Yeah, please go ahead.
we've here's the thing, like, this is just an industry that's behind the other industries. Look at retail. Who is killing it in retail? People who have these huge followings. Mr. Beast, this is a kid that started on YouTube at 14, like 10 years ago, and he's a billionaire because, not because of his YouTube views, but because he has the most popular chocolate brand out there now that he put his name on. And he tried the Mr. Beast burger thing. That didn't work so well, but being able to build a personal brand that we can then lend our name, or that we can then again transfer on or have products in behind it and scale with it, is something that this is the new main business model. The business model before used to be build a product and then find and believe that there's a following. What I have seen the last, especially 10 years, is build a following and then bring them a product. And it's the same thing with in the legal community. These legal firms are going to build an affinity, build a following, and now somebody else can come and deliver it to the community in another way as well, or in their stead.
Great. Dennis, thank you so much. All right, so we're going to flip the switch in just a moment. But before we do that, and you'll start asking a few questions,
Okay.
could you please let the audience know how can they contact you if they're interested to start a podcast, learn more about LPN? How can they do that, Dennis?
Super simple, thelegalpodcastnetwork.com. If you're watching this streaming on video, whatever, you can see it over my shoulder. These cameras turn you around. All right, over my shoulder here, thelegalpodcastnetwork.com. If you want to connect with me personally, and I've been having a lot of fun the last year and a half or so on LinkedIn, had it for almost 20 years, never did anything with it. And then a year and a half ago, I said, hey, team, I'm going to go see what we can make happen out of LinkedIn. And we've built a lot of referral relationships. We've gotten a lot of clients out of it, but I've also gotten a lot of great relationships out of it with attorneys who are not handing me any money. I'm not handing them money. So if you're looking for more of like a, personal connection, or at least to be able to pay attention to me as an individual, LinkedIn's a great place. Also for myself, dmondemand.expert. That's where my podcasts are. You can access the podcast that I host. You can access the podcast that I appear on, and you can access the networks, the Legal Podcast Network and the Authority Podcast Network. Those are the best ways to reach me.
Terrific. All right, great. All right, so Dennis, we're flipping the switch. Now you're the questioner.
The questioner. So, it's interesting because I get more people asking me to sell my law firm than I think should be legally allowed, because I'm not a lawyer. I've never had anything to do with law, but just the fact that I have legal in my name, I kind of get this stuff coming across. So because of that, I'm able to kind of have, at least in my peripheral, your industry. And I think one of the things that's been kind of like rattling around in my brain, especially the last few years, is the concept of PE coming in and rolling up firms and doing all of that stuff. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? Is that something that, if I were actually a law firm and not just a guy that had legal in his name, with all these opportunities for top dollar to sell my law firm to, I don't know who these people are that want to buy my law firm that doesn't exist, but if I were that person that had the firm, how, like, should I be looking at PE versus private? Like, what are the advantages or disadvantages of each? And long term, how do you see PE being a player in this sort of field of buying and selling of
Yeah,
firms?
great question. And there's a lot of buzz in the legal industry right now about the entry of private equity, into the legal space. So let's first take a step back and recognize that, except for the state of Arizona and Washington, D.C., non-lawyers cannot have ownership interests in law firms. So then why all the buzz about private equity? What has happened, and it's probably happened longer than the last 2 years, but certainly in the last 2 years, let's just call it since 2023-ish, and maybe that's really 3 years at this point, that there has been the introduction of MSOs, managed service organizations. We see MSOs in the medical field, we see MSOs in the accounting field, and now they've entered into the legal industry. And what managed service organizations do is they'll say, okay, let the professional here, the lawyers will run and own the law firm. Let the managed service organization, or something like an MSO, can also be an LSO, legal services organization. They will run HR. They will hire your paralegals, the legal assistants. They will handle marketing for the law firm. Okay, in consideration for a monthly fee that is negotiated and which is not directly tied to the revenues that come into the law firm, because it is hugely important that the private equity investors in these MSOs, if that's the model, and that's the model that I continue to see that's being deployed, that the revenues coming in from the law firm are not being shared with the MSO. Instead, there is a negotiated. I was recently on on a webinar about this, and they even have a third party in the MSO that was being explained. In that instance, having a third party determine the monthly consideration that's paid to the MSO, so that we're avoiding unauthorized practice of law. So that was a mouthful. Then getting to answer your question, Dennis. Like, if you're a law firm and we're thinking about, okay, how can PE come into your firm? Well, first question is going to be, well, how does private equity come into my law firm without violating the unauthorized practice of law prohibitions in 49? I mean, Utah is essentially coming out. Utah was there for a little while, but essentially we've got 49 out of 50 states that still prohibit non-lawyer owners of law firms. So if we're going to be setting up this MSO model, and is PE going to come into it, how do we separate the law firm part of the practice from the non-law firm part of the practice? Then Dennis's question is, all right, what types of law firms does PE even want to invest in? And what we're seeing so far is that there's significant interest in plaintiff side personal injury law. Okay, there's going to be other law areas of law that PE is going to be interested in. Why that area? And this is really, I think, the answer to your question, Dennis, is that what's PE looking for? They're looking for repetitive business, okay, that is going to provide returns to the law firm on a relatively predictable basis. So why plaintiff side personal injury law? Well, because we know that there is a steady stream of single event matters in single event personal injury law. That is, let's say, car crash, premises matters, other types of volume areas in single event personal injury law. Very importantly for PE is that they know that the payers, the defendants, by and large, are insurance companies. Insurance companies will pay on the claims. So we've got repetitiveness of actions, and we have a steady and reliable payer on the other side of the V, the defense. So when it comes to other areas of law, we're thinking about, okay, we're running such and such a practice. Do we offer, what type of repetition does our practice offer, and what's the cash flow, the dollar flow going to be into our practice? So it's a very long-winded answer to you, Dennis, in terms of, I think that where private equity is going to come in, where they're not going to be able to check boxes, is that, okay, if, like in so many law firms still today, we were talking about law firm sales 1.0 before versus 2.0, when we have traditional rainmaker attorneys, okay, that are driving the clients to the law firm, I think that PE is going to be hesitant in those types of law firms, because so many of the clients could leave. And we see this, you open up any law journal anywhere in the United States on any given day, and you'll see that a team of lawyers left such and such law firm and went to another law firm, right? Because in our rules of professional conduct, we have a prohibition against restrictive covenants on lawyers, right? There's no non-competition restrictions that can be placed on lawyers, except actually in law firm sales. And there's some other exceptions in certain states, but by and large, you have that restrictive covenant issue. So if PE wants to come in and they want repetitive business from repetitive clients and steady flows of income, but you've got this prohibition against non-competition restrictions, that is going to be, in my opinion, that's going to be a bit of a roadblock for as PE is going to come in. On the other hand, when you have law firms that will consistently generate clients digitally, what we were talking about before, and what we talk about a lot here, and what we really see where the future is going with business generation for law firms, is the rise of digital rainmaker law firms. When we are not dependent upon several attorneys for our clients, and instead our clients are coming in consistently digitally, and the MSO, which, yes, is getting money from private equity, and that money is helping to fund the marketing, and we are building real digital value, we are building real real brand value. That is where the private equity is going to come more into our industry, but they're just going to be looking for, how do we get repeat clients? How do we get steady flow of revenues into the firm? And if we can invest in a law firm environment such as that, repeat business, and steady payers for cash flow, then the MSO model with with private equity money, they will actually be able to go out and hire the talent, right? On the legal side, they can't influence how the lawyers are going to be practicing law, okay? But if a law firm is dependent on a commodity, right, which is essentially talented lawyers to just do the legal work, where those lawyers don't need to focus on bringing the clients into the law firm. And I really think, Dennis, that's where the industry is today. I really think that younger associates, and we see this all the time, because we see that younger associates, they don't want to buy their boss's law firms, right?
Mhm.
They went to law school, they're talented, they are intelligent, they get good experience, they give good advice, but they don't want to build a book of business today. They want a job. And I think that, again, it's a very long-winded answer to your question, but I think where PE is going to come in and add value is say, hey, we can help with the marketing dollars if the law firm can then go out and just get the talented lawyers to just do the work, which I'll end the answer here by coming full circle with, let's say, where if PE has done well in the dental arena. Let the dentists just clean the teeth, fill the cavities, do the implants, do root canals, and then let the private equity, the MSO side, run the business, do the marketing, And I think that part of it is coming to a theater near us, with PE coming into the legal industry.
So I know that, and I read about, like Arizona, DC, and Utah, but I remember like on the ballot that like Wisconsin was another one that was looking at doing this. And I think there at one time, something like 14 or 15 states that were considering. Am I to assume that based on the answer that you just gave, that pretty much flushed out and didn't happen? Or is a lot of that still kind of in in lieu, or not in lieu, but like kind of, in hanging out in the air still?
Right. So I think it's still hanging out in the air, but the issue is the volatility of A is volatility, B is just time. Okay. So on the one hand, it's volatile in terms of will Arizona and how and which other states will and Arizona they did remove the rule of professional conduct about non-lawyers having ownership interests in law firms, right?
Mhm.
So if you are going to be if one wants to become is a non-lawyer, wants to be an owner of a law firm, how volatile is your money thinking about other states that are considering to do what Arizona did? That's also going to take time. And I think as the money wants to enter into the industry, right, they see the opportunity, right? But the time, I think that's probably the better part of the answer here as compared to the volatility. But as the time and effort it's going to take for other states to adopt what Arizona has adopted has meant that, hey, we don't want to sit on the sidelines. That is, private equity investors, other investors that want to invest into legal are saying we don't want to wait for states to do what Arizona did. Let's see if we go down the MSO route. So I think it could happen, Dennis. Personally, I'd put my stakes on the MSO side of it than additional states doing what Arizona did.
Let me ask you one more question, and it's going to be just a total gear switch. But
Yeah,
I've been thinking about this lately as well. The legal industry is the longest tenured industry that exists. Like lawyers practice law, like the retirement age of like the average lawyer is like 80 something years old. And I've talked to attorneys for 20 something years. Trust me, there are 80 and 90-year-old attorneys out there aplenty. So we're talking about selling a law firm. What is kind of the sweet spot? And I'm sure there's like financial, but I'm just more talking about age, because you have no idea how many times I talk to some individual that's up in their years and their referrals have died off, and they're just like, I don't know, I still want to keep going, but I don't know what to, and there's nothing to sell because. So what is sort of that sweet spot where attorneys realistically should be saying, okay, if I really want to maximize my career, make the money that I want to make out of it, and then get the best exit possible, where does that sort of stereo? And again, we're on a legal show, so I know there could be all kinds of asterisks and in the exceptions of, but where does that sweet spot sit for me if I were an attorney to exit
yeah, great question.
age wise?
Yeah, great question, and we'll be really direct in terms of our experience on that. Age is 55 to 75. So why ages 55 to 75? We find that lawyers between ages 55 and 75, which means those are lawyers that have practiced somewhere between 30 years to all the way up to 50 years of practice. We consider lawyers in that range are in the MVP years of their careers. MVP years of their careers, meaning that they have the knowledge base, okay, to know one or more practice areas super well that attracts clients to their firm. They've developed a reputation in their community, in their state, regionally, sometimes even nationally. They close on matters regularly, right? Somebody's calling their office because they know that this lawyer has the skill set, has the experience to do the legal work that lawyer practices in. When it comes to selling, well, then don't we want to sell in our MVP years of our career? Now, what does selling mean, right? I've referenced earlier about law firm sales 1.0. What we're typically seeing in the types of law firms and lawyers that we work with, which we call small business law firms. So those are firms that typically have 20 lawyers and less, 10 lawyers and less. Heck, they can have 5 lawyers and less. In law firm sales 1.0, because we're selling, that MVP attorney is selling his or her book of business, their reputation. The selling lawyer is typically entering into financial terms that involve an earnout. A buyer is saying, okay, we may pay some amount at a closing table, but we are much more comfortable as a buyer. We are much more comfortable paying a percentage of the revenues attributable to your defined clients, Mr. or Ms. Seller, over a negotiated period of time. So if you're selling between ages 55 and 75, so you're in those MVP years of your career, the beautiful part of these types of sales under Law Firm Sales 1.0 is that seller can be anywhere in the world. A call comes in, a text comes in, you go onto a Zoom video with a current client or a new client and say, I joined such and such a law firm, and you are in great hands with Nancy. Nancy has been doing this practice area for 20 years. Nancy will handle your matter, soup to nuts. I'm always available. You could text me, you could email to me, but Nancy's going to be your lead attorney. Selling attorney then is getting a percentage of all of the revenues coming in from that matter. So the benefit there, Dennis, in terms of, okay, why sell between ages 55 and 75? Because you still have, or you absolutely have that book of business. That's what buyers want. They want your clients. They want your reputation. As compared to what you were saying, Dennis, before is, okay, let's say you held out. Now you are in your early 70s, but at this point, clients aren't hiring you as much anymore. You've lost your associates at your practice. Your book of business is literally, it's just a fraction of what it used to be. Then you're just not going to benefit from your career's worth of efforts of building up that book of business. Now, you talked about an asterisk, so let's put our finger on a certain asterisk, because I think this really lends to what you're doing, Dennis, with the Legal Podcast Network, right? Where lawyers are developing authority today. We're becoming, there are lawyer influencers, right? There are lawyers that are having meteoric, and law firms that are having meteoric growth because they are recognizing the value of digital marketing. And what we're also starting to see in the industry, which is markedly different than the 55 to 75-year-old sellers, is what we call startup law firms, right? You could be a startup law firm, and because you're doing everything well, from bringing in the clients, adopting the right CRM, treating clients well, getting referrals well, building up a brand. People are coming to the law firm not because of Jack Jones, the attorney who's been known in the community. You referenced before about the Little League games that the Jones Law Firm has always had their banner in right field every season for the last 10 seasons. Like that Rainmaker attorney is that MVP type attorney. You're 40 something that may have meteoric growth because they have just been ahead of the curve. Digitally, we're seeing there the ability to sell for real money at a closing table, and we're calling those startup law firms that a purchasing firm is going to want, because purchasing firm wants and needs those clients and that digital value and brand equity.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing is traditionally it was a legacy thing. This is, you build it over time, over years. But the newer model, or the thing that you're seeing kind of come, is more of an entrepreneurial approach of coming in, building out the systems, building out the team. And I know I said questions, but I want to ask one last question, because I think
Please.
this kind of ties both of us together.
Yeah,
And
please.
that is, with what we do in podcasting, obviously the likeness of the attorney themselves, the video, what we call the brand assets in my industry, all of these things that, building videos that answer questions, assuage fears, provide clarity, you're still the Rainmaker, but you're just doing it at scale digitally. You didn't hand out 100 business cards. You had a video that gets seen 100 times a month, every month, ad infinitum. And so having those assets, are those firms being bought for the likeness? In other words, if I'm selling and my face is all over and I did the videos, does my likeness then transfer it with this firm as well? Because I know we're getting a lot into that with the AI and digital and ownership of your sort of IP of who you are, I guess is the word. Like, is that a factor now?
It's becoming a factor for sure. So we're doing our first deal right now that name, image, likeness is part of the deal. Now, our client is not getting money at the closing table yet, right? Like this particular client, okay? But because she is bringing in her name, image, likeness to build up a department at this firm, right? This firm has a department that is not in its infancy, like it's a decent department. Her coming in, her name, image, likeness, she's going to be adding digital value. She is going to be getting a percentage of the revenues that are coming in digitally to that practice area in that firm for a negotiated period of time. Now, there's going to be different angles to that, Dennis. There will be real consideration paid for the value of that podcast. Let's just say that she runs, because we want to succeed to it. And I call it the Zorro effect, right? Like that is, if she's been leading the podcast for the last 3 years, and everybody thinks of her as the one that leads the podcast, I at least believe that there's a Zorro effect. Just change the mask of Zorro, right? And
Mhm.
we have someone very talented that comes in. Now she's going to be the new authority of leading that podcast. And there's a way to transfer, from let's say Zorro generation to Zorro generation for those of us that enjoy and watch the Zorro movies. But essentially, it just means like, if we are paying for name, image, likeness, okay, then how does it transfer? What is going to be the benefit? Short answer to your question is it may already happen. It's coming up in our first deal, and almost any deal that I see going forward where we're talking about digital value is going to consider the NIL of one or more lawyers at a selling law firm.
All right. And this isn't a question. This is just going to be yes or no. Because I love to summarize in my mind. I can sell my personal brand. I can sell my company brand. I can sell my systems that I've created, my company that I've created entrepreneurially, or I can sell my legacy. Is that a fair? Am I missing something, or did I add something that shouldn't be
No, I
there?
think I think you got a lot of it. I think the systems are a little tough. I think a lot of people say, "Oh, we've got great systems at our law firm," and we're often seeing that, whether someone is using Clio or Smokeball or Smart Advocate, or like, unless you really truly have something so unique with systems, we just haven't found that systems are something that are necessarily being
May-
sold.
Maybe the word I meant to use was my infrastructure.
It
My
could be.
I could
It could.
I
It's
could
just
because
whether.
you said there's younger people building up and you know what I mean, and then they're selling and walking away. So I kind of looked at that as more of an entrepreneurial infrastructure. I built this company infrastructure, selling that off. Maybe I misspoke.
No, 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 you didn't misspeak at all, and I think there's something to that, but at the end of the day, the way we look at things, and just wanna go back to what you were saying before about, okay, how are we selling our personal brand, and are we selling our personal brand separately from our legacy? It's fascinating, by the way, thanks for planting the seed, okay? Um,
New
and
revenue stream. Let's
so
talk about it
right?
afterwards.
Yes. I think the answer to that is yes. It's just at the end of the day, what we're regularly, talking to is that the energy source of law firms is clients. And if a startup law firm has developed a way that is developing clients faster, better quality clients, well-paying clients, that a firm can derive revenues and profits from, and how they are doing it, that is going to provide value to purchasing firms. And just to bring it back to the PE side, and it is possible that for those buying firms that have outside investors that are making sure no unauthorized practice of law, they can provide the capital that your previous sources of law firm buyers just couldn't. They just didn't have access to that type of capital, and that type of capital is absolutely arriving into this industry.
Well, I have certainly gained more knowledge in a little thing that was in my periphery. Hopefully, you as well with the podcasting and some of that. So I've enjoyed our conversation. Thank you
Yeah,
very much,
no,
my friend.
likewise. So, Dennis, thank you again so much. Dennis is the founder of the Legal Podcast Network. Dennis, just wish you great success in continuing to grow LPN, APN as well. And just to repeat again to the audience, just how they can get in touch with you.
Legalpodcastnetwork.com, or the Ohio State University, the legalpodcastnetwork.com, as well as LinkedIn, just first and last name. So I think those are probably the easiest ways.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. And that is episode 35 of the Ask the Law Firm Seller Show.